Good morning, everybody. I hope you're nice and awake on this Wednesday morning. Thank you for joining us today for this awesome webinar on mitigating risks of Russian trade control evasion. I'm your moderator, Nikki Kenyon. I'm an associate managing director with Dolphin, the dedicated online financial integrity network. And we are the go-to resource for sanctions, AML, financial crime, information, news, you name it. We offer more than 100 courses and training programs covering the full spectrum of financial crimes and compliance. And we're also a community of financial integrity specialists who share expertise. So we're excited to have you all here today to discuss a very timely and important topic. We are joined by an incredible panel of experts who will address the transshipment of restricted goods and technologies with a particular focus on mitigating the risk of these products ending up in the hands of the Russian military. But the first thing I'm going to do is just go over some housekeeping items, so bear with me for 2 seconds, maybe a little more. For those members who have received Dolphin's risk management certification in either global sanctions or Russia sanctions, this webinar will count toward 1 continuing education credit. It'll be automatically credited to your account. If you need to learn more about our certification programs, please contact us at marketing@dolphin.org, and we'll send you more information. Everybody who's on here will also get a free 2-week trial to explore the platform. So the Dolphin platform is yours for 2 weeks to take a look. All registrants will also be sent a follow-up email with this webinar recording. Also, we encourage questions. Please ask questions. We want this to be as interactive as possible. You have a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Add your questions to there, and we'll take as many as possible at the end of the session. And one last thing, I invite you to follow Dolphin, K2 Integrity, and C4ADS, and our panelists, and myself, on LinkedIn. We're open to connecting and sharing information, and we're happy to meet you and chat with you outside this webinar. So there you have it. That's the housekeeping, and thank you again for being here. Now, let me introduce our panelists. So first we have Amir Fadabi. He's a senior director at K2 Integrity. He advises all types of clients, including fintech companies, global financial institutions, and governments on all sorts of AML CFT issues, with a particular focus on complex matters related to sanctions imposed by key authorities like the United States, EU, and UK. Prior to joining K2 Integrity, Amir served as the global sanctions lead at Airwallex, where he led the company's sanctions compliance program. And before that, he was a member of the BNP Paribas sanctions compliance team. So he was working out of the bank's Paris and New York offices, which makes me really jealous. He evaluated the applicability of US sanctions to the bank's activities in its European markets and provided advice on trade transactions with respect to US export controls. He is also the founder of sanctionsexpert.com, a respected thought leader on sanctions and compliance. Amir's great. Elena Trigub is the Secretary General of NACO, the Independent Anti-Corruption Commission that was created by Transparency International in 2017 to focus on good governance of the defense and security sector, anti-corruption reforms in areas that are critical for national security, and due diligence in the defense industry. After the full-scale invasion by Russia, Elena was elected as the member of the Anti-Corruption Council of the Defense Ministry of Ukraine. NACO launched projects on stopping Western components flowing to aggressive authoritarian states like Russia and Iran, eliminating gaps in export controls and sanctions policies. And before joining this great organization, Elena served as the director at Ukraine's Ministry of Economic Development and Trade, where she oversaw the portfolio of more than $12 billion worth of international development projects. After residing in the United States for 10 years, she returned to Ukraine and joined the government to contribute to the post-Maidan democratic transformation of the country. And last but not least, we have Al Maggard. He's an analyst with C4ADS's Conflict Affected States Cell, where he specializes in investigating illicit tech procurement networks tied to the Russian defense industry. Prior to joining C4ADS, he worked as a contractor with the fraud section of the Justice Department's criminal division. Al's professional background also includes due diligence investigations and research for a nonpartisan foreign policy think tank. So as you guys can see, these folks are the absolute gold standard in their field. And I know you're going to get a lot out of this webinar. So let's get started. The first thing I'd like to do is give each panelist a chance to provide an overview of how the trade finance space has changed since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Although we won't specifically focus on sanctions in this webinar, if there are relevant sanctions-specific changes you want to flag, please do and highlight those, okay? So let's start with Amir.
Thank you, Nikki, and so glad to be here. So if I want to talk about the changes over the past almost 2 years since the invasion of Ukraine, I can talk about three main things. The first thing we have seen is the explosion of export restrictions. It's akin to 9/11 with respect to terrorist financing. Suddenly, we had all regulators expanding their controls for goods that were sensitive and even non-sensitive. That takes me to the second point, which is suddenly we have a wide range of goods and technologies being subjected to very complicated restriction. And these are not only dual-use goods. Sometimes these are like luxury goods or simple goods subject to EAR. So it's not only about sensitive goods. Those are the main target, but also we have so many other things. And don't forget, when we talk about trade, there is an outbound from Russia. So there are so many trade restrictions for things that are coming out of Russia. So that's also something we have seen. And lastly, one thing that has been very interesting for me, and I guess everyone is struggling, wrestling with this idea of how to find a good balance, is the role of financial institutions in export control and strategic trade controls. Banks, notably, are more and more nervous. They are asking questions, what's our role? How can we make it better? Knowing that we have very limited knowledge and expertise when it comes to the export and import. But as we see, regulators are publishing more and more guidance and talking about the role of financial institutions. And this is a fast developing space. So these are the three things I wanted to mention that happened over the past 2 years.
Thanks, Amir. And obviously, things are getting very complicated. So these kinds of webinars are really good for folks to attend to kind of get ideas of how to deal with the complexities. How about you, Elena? What have you seen as far as developments in this space?
Well, I definitely agree with Amir's parallel about their explosion. Definitely, we saw that different actors, the banks, their semiconductor companies, their machine tools producers, and everybody, the governments, they all felt this explosion. At the same time, this explosion, what we observed as their basically civil society organization, it was confusing for many of those actors. And we see this confusion created the space, for example, in which different institutions such as law enforcement, government, executive branch, legislative branch, companies, when they reach out, for example, to organizations like our organization, this is before the full-scale invasion, we were not an actor in this space. But now we became an actor in this space together with other organizations, a stronger actor with Kiev School of Economics, with RUSI, with other non-governmental think tanks. And why did this happen? It's because the system lacks capacity to process this explosion, the new regulations. There is a huge, what we notice, lack of professionals who dealing with this issue in commercial, in private sector, and also in public sector. And we, for example, face the situation when we are requested to provide information for different stakeholders, for example, for the European Commission, for FISMA, to sanction companies to form those packages of sanctions for, in particular, for Russian military industry. And for me, this is new. This is what I wanted to highlight. And today, during our webinar, this is why I wanted to focus on the role of journalists, of civil society, of OSINT, how there are more official institutions who have this role in their duties to study their clients, to do due diligence, how they can rely on all this research, just because we understood that the capacity within the institutions, unfortunately, is not there, and they have not increased their capacity to the level at which they can comfortably deal with this so-called explosion.
And I'm really, really hoping that webinars such as this and events such as this will help build that capacity. We have a really, really good mix of attendees. So hopefully we'll get some good questions and be able to really increase their expertise. And last but definitely not least, yet again, we have Al. What have you seen? You're the guy with the boots on the ground. You're the one that does the analysis. What have you seen?
Well, pleasure to be here. Boots on the ground is quite the phrase. I mean, I'm what I do basically for people's awareness is I go through trade data, publicly available information, corporate records, procurement data, and try to piece together the supply chains through which potentially dual-use goods make their way to Russian defense industry end users. And I like to say that I've seen things that haven't been reported on, and that have novel insights, but really a lot of the I guess you could say red flag conduct that I've seen in my research fits into existing trends that have already been pointed out with regards to semiconductors, other dual-use goods. One of the most apparent ones is the importance of Turkey, China, and Central Asia to a lesser extent as conduits for transshipment of dual-use goods to Russia. Though there's something I want to point out and really emphasize here. We need to make a distinction between transshipment of new goods that happen over the course of a few days and the re-export of used dual-use goods from third countries where those goods had already been imported or imported, used. There's a whole secondary market for machine tools, for example, which is the field that I look at most closely. And this secondary market of used machine tools is, from my understanding, very underregulated. Participants in that field may not know that they need to, for example, obtain an export license to ship a used 5-axis precision machine tool to someone in Russia, say. So, I mean, going back to Elena's comments, there is definitely a need in that respect for actors in the private sector to develop not only their due diligence monitoring, but also just their knowledge of how these export control systems work and what their responsibilities are. I also want to speak to Elena's comments regarding capacity. A few weeks ago, Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo was at I think it's the Reagan Defense Symposium. I don't remember the name of it, but she made some very telling comments regarding the United States export control capabilities. Right. We normally think of the Bureau of Industry and Security as a leading actor in global export control enforcement. And compared to a lot of other countries, it is a blue ribbon actor, I guess you could say. But Secretary Raimondo pointed out that BIS is working with the same budget it had a decade ago, which is something on the order of $200 million. And they are understaffed, under-resourced. And when you hear the Secretary of Commerce coming out and saying that the leading export control enforcement agency in the world, which coordinates with all kinds of partner countries, is under-resourced, that should give you a sense of how important it is for private sector actors to do their due diligence, like we've been saying, and not only do pre-transaction due diligence, but perhaps at a certain point see how their tools are being used abroad and undertake some sort of action to bring that to the attention of authorities.
Yeah, it's a partnership, and it should always be a partnership. And Al, I want to build on this issue of transshipment and the countries involved, right? A few weeks ago, the Financial Times published an article about Turkey's increase in imports of 45 civilian items used by Russia's military from the EU. So I want to discuss some risk indicators involved. For example, the article highlighted that official Turkish data this year showed a surge in declarations of exports of high priority goods to countries like Azerbaijan, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. But those countries' statistical agencies have not recorded a matching rise in imports. So the discrepancy alone is a red flag and almost certainly means these goods are being shipped to Russia through intermediaries. BIS has this entire database of red flags listed on their website. Can we discuss some other red flags that you've seen? And I'll start with Al on this one.
Sure. With regards to what the trade data shows and discrepancies like that, I think one thing to bear in mind is in terms of what's publicly available vis-a-vis trade data, some jurisdictions are more transparent than others. This is ultimately the same problem that we have when conducting investigations based off of corporate records, court records, any kind of publicly available information. Some jurisdictions don't make an effort to make that information available, or they don't have the resources to. I don't want to make it seem like it's deliberate. But in terms of actual risk indicators, I think one that really is easy to spot is if you do have the trade data and you do have the wherewithal to conduct your due diligence, which you should, looking to see where these goods are being shipped to or shipped from, who is shipping them to Russia? Are those firms owned by people with Russian surnames? We don't want to obviously just target Russians who are abroad and involved in legitimate business. But when you have then a company owned by a Russian person that was set up after February 24th, 2022, that is a red flag, for example. And it not even doesn't have to be, a company that's owned by Russians. If a company involved in shipping dual use goods from any jurisdiction, secondary jurisdiction, third country jurisdiction, was set up after February 24th, 2022, that merits further scrutiny. And just the very fact of goods being shipped through third countries in an uneconomic fashion, there's costs involved for a company if it's going to ship through a third country. Why would it need to do that, especially if it's a dual use good? If you're shipping it to Russia, you ought to have the necessary export control license. It shouldn't be an issue. Why would you have to ship through a third country? That's a risk factor as well. Beyond that, the example that you pointed out from the Financial Times article, which was a very good piece, showing how there's a discrepancy between the exports and imports. When you do see those discrepancies, it is important to bear in mind that there may be inadequacies in the importing countries' trade data. You can't rule that out. But yeah, that is also a red flag as well. Just the very fact that those trade data aren't, matching, regardless of whether or not the records are available. The fact that they might not be is also a red flag. If you're shipping to a jurisdiction with non-transparent trade data standards, that is also a cause for concern.
Yeah, and this is something that I always flag for classes that I teach. A risk indicator does not necessarily mean an illegal thing or a bad thing is happening, but it is cause to take a closer look. Elena, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, of course. I just want to say that not only BIS has their red flag list, but now, since civil society stepped in to help the private sector, to help the governments, we also on NACO website, together with other our partner organization, published a list of those red flags. And the colleague just mentioned a number of them. So I will not repeat. Indeed, we call it red flags in post-February 2022 world. So indeed, we saw cases, unfortunately, that when companies, it looked like they were not familiar with those red flags. And I, for example, was testifying in the Senate in the United States just several months ago about one case which we investigated of a Swiss company where they were sending basically critical technology to 6 Chinese companies that were registered after 2014. And very simple, the people who registered them were who? Russian nationals. So how they can overlook something like that, right? So, and this is why also I just wanted to say that, in my opinion, it is very good that now more and more people are familiar with those red flags, so that we have a chance not only to communicate those red flags, but also we have a chance to ask companies why they were, not doing their due diligence. Because we communicate a lot with the companies, and very often we hear that it is too complicated. We need too many people devoted to this subject. But my answer is very often, sorry, but if a civil society organization is able to enter their trade database, Export Genius, we can watch, we can look all the shipments, and we, for example, clearly see if the registration of the company is in some known transshipment hub, such as, we know them, Hong Kong, Kazakhstan, China, and so on. We more carefully look at those transshipments, right? So why you in your company cannot do this? So for me, it's very good that this knowledge, it used to be more technical, narrow knowledge, that now, because of the war, it is spreading so much. And I'm happy about it. And I'm happy that now more and more people, even from outside, are able to have oversight over, this due diligence of those companies.
Awesome. So Amir, do you have anything to add to that?
I agree with what the other panelists mentioned. One thing that I've seen a lot is the apparently and ostensibly unnecessary involvement of third parties in a transaction, especially when it comes to payment. To me, if a payment coming from someone and goods are co-signed to someone else, it's very common in many trade transactions, but anyone who is in a certain type of trade, they can easily detect unusual involvement of third parties. So that's something to be on the lookout for. Also, something else that is interesting is new ways of payment. If a counterparty was using a very large bank and suddenly you see payments are coming from a local payment company, that's something not by itself problematic, but it justifies further investigation. These are the two things I can think of.
Awesome. And, there's a question that came in that's actually relevant to this discussion. Maybe one of you guys can answer this. Has Russia stopped sharing trade data following various media exposés, or is it just a lag in provisioning of the data?
I can speak to this somewhat, and I don't want to mischaracterize anything. The trade data, as I understand it, is no longer published, but it's still available. There are various vendors out there who are able to get this data. It's not always clear how, but the data is out there, but it is not updated on a regular basis, right? So you may have to wait several months for, it might not be until December of whatever year until you get data for, several months prior.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I figured I'd stick that in there since it was relevant. I wanted a follow-up question, and I'll ask Al first. Russia's foreign purchases of high priority items, they're coming from China, Hong Kong, through new routes via Thailand and Malaysia. South Korean machine tools are also winding up in Russian hands. Do you have any advice about how to mitigate these risks?
Well, who with regards to whom? Who advice for who to mitigate what?
Well, advice for the attendees, and we have a ton of people here from financial institutions and from various firms. So, as far as mitigating the risks of these financing these transactions, of really just participating in these transactions, is there anything that they can look for?
Know your client, due diligence. It's maybe I'm a little biased. I think it's pretty straightforward. Try to do your best, do your best to figure out who you're dealing with. If you're dealing with a company in one of these known transshipment jurisdictions, whether it's Hong Kong, whether it's Turkey, develop capabilities, seek out resources that will enable you to figure out who you're dealing with. In some jurisdictions like Turkey, it may be a bit more difficult to find out who a company's owner is, but there are still resources online you can turn to that will allow you to see when a company was set up. So if you're dealing with someone in Turkey and their company was set up after February 24th, 2022, and they're trying to buy a 5-axis machine tool from you, you should probably flag that. And you should probably think twice before engaging in that transaction. There's a whole ecosystem of due diligence resources. There are companies out there that specialize in obtaining this information, whether it's about company ownership, what have you. There's really no good excuse for not trying to seek out those resources. I've worked at 2 due diligence firms over the course of my life. They are out there, and if you seek them out, they will work with you. That's probably the best advice I can give, is just do your due diligence, and do your due diligence on how you can do due diligence.
And dig deeper. List screening is no longer enough. I've been saying this for several years. Dig deeper, right?
That's right. Yeah. I'm familiar with the list-based approach. And the fact of the matter is the frequency with which new companies, shell companies can be set up far outstrips the pace with which the people behind those screening lists can update them. Companies really need to take a more proactive digging approach to their due diligence. I agree that screening lists aren't enough.
Okay. I'm going to go to Amir. You got anything to add to that?
I think my advice is going to be more for financial institutions, but before that, I have to say this is a shared responsibility. We need governments, customs, exporters, shipping companies, financial institutions, all taking their responsibility, because it's really unfair to push everything on financial institutions because they were historically good at compliance and they have the resources. It won't work if we have that approach. That being said, I guess it's really important to think about being proactive. If a bank as a bank, you had a client who was sending goods that now are targeted that used to go to Russia. You want to look into that client to see, okay, what they are doing now. Is that trade rerouted to somewhere else? And if so, where that is? Is it Armenia, or is it Azerbaijan, Turkey, or somewhere else? So that's something that banks need to be proactive. The other thing is banks are sitting on top of an ocean of data. To use that data that you have and think about all the knowledge elements. In sanction, we know financial sanction are strict liability, but think about the knowledge element as part of the US export control. If banks knowingly engage in a financial activity that relates to a breach of EAR, they can be on the hook. So you really need to make sure that if you have a knowledge, you act upon it. And I know the resources are limited, but again, now it's time to reassess where the resources should be allocated. So use the data that you have. And the trend analysis now is something very helpful.
Awesome, thank you. Elena, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, yeah, I agree with your recommendation to dig deeper and be proactive. But also I want to, from our experience, to tell you that we are proactive because we are civil society activists and we gather all this data, all these packages of information about different companies. And unfortunately, what I noticed is that, for example, governments, they are very happy to get anything because they lack capacity and they want help. But financial institutions, they are very careful because once they get this information, they can get themselves in trouble and they usually don't cooperate much with us. I just wanted to say it, but I think they should cooperate more for our common good. That's all my words.
Terrific. No, I absolutely agree. Okay, so Elena, this one is for you. We've talked about some loopholes, inconsistencies of restrictions across jurisdictions that are particularly challenging for enforcement. There are loopholes that Russia obviously exploits with, waivers that are issued, especially by the EU, because they need to reach consensus. What do you think will be the end state of the latest EU package of restrictions that's being discussed now? What should US firms and financial institutions be on the watch for? And how can trade controls and sanctions be more effective? This is something that I've always advised folks, like, watch the news, watch the media. I know we have some folks that are, media members here. Watch the reporting. What would you suggest?
Indeed, my organization, we just published a report which is called Inconsistency in Action. It's about inconsistency of sanction across different jurisdictions. It is really puzzling to see that, when we talk about Russian defense industry base, Russian sector, we understand it is a big sector. There are up to 10,000 companies in Russia who help to make Russian weapons, right? But what we noticed is that different jurisdictions, they sanction those companies independently from each other, and they do not coordinate. And it looks, we made a matrix that shows, for example, that we studied several hundred Russian defense companies, not really some small manufacturers, but big ones like Rostec, for example, Proton, the Ural plant of transport of mechanical engineering, like big ones. And what we saw is that sometimes a company is under sanctions. In US, it's not sanctioned by EU. Switzerland is usually the last one who sanctions. We studied Japan, Canada, other sanctioned jurisdictions. And of course, the jurisdiction that sanctioned those companies the most is, guess which? Ukraine. because Ukraine has the best knowledge of all this Russian defense company, because Ukraine has direct interest, Ukraine is attacked, Ukraine has access to all the Russian language resources. So Ukraine is the most effective jurisdiction. And my recommendation, therefore, would be for professionals who now at our webinar, go on the website of Ukrainian National Agency for Corruption Prevention, look at the list of companies which they sanctioned, because this is the most comprehensive list out of all jurisdictions. And if you go to NACO website, you will see how there are empty spaces under US, under EU, under Canada, and they are with time filling this empty space. And these packages of sanctions which you are referring to, now we are on the 12th package, I think, of the European Commission. You know what they do? They just catch up with Ukrainian sanctioning, basically. So for me, it's a little bit mind-blowing, because why to do the same work twice? But unfortunately, we understand these are different legal regimes, and they need to come up with their own legal conclusion about those companies. And for example, this is where we help as a civil society organization. What we do, for example, we submit to European Commission list of Russian companies, names of these companies, the weapon they produce. Then we submit to them evidence that this weapon was intercepted on Ukrainian territory. It was actually used in war against Ukraine. And we'll also submit to them just, PDF files from basically links from Russian news, because if you go on Russian internet, you can find anything. They say, this factory now repaired this weapon. This factory now sent this weapon to the front line. You just copy paste and send it to the sanctioning jurisdiction. And then the sanctioning authority will take their decision about sanctioning this company. But it is a little bit, of course, frustrating for me that we have to do all this technical work. And it is frustrating to me that partners are not synchronizing their sanction lists to do it, faster, more effectively. And we still have those gaps, which are also confusing companies, because if you only check your own jurisdiction or only American, sometimes the company is not sanctioned just because your jurisdiction never had capacity yet to reach this company. They will sanction this company later, but this company should already be sanctioned today. So that's something which I wanted to share.
Yeah, and we sometimes get frustrated because the process takes so long, but it's got to be a process to make sure that all the evidence is there and everything else. So I get that as well. Amir, do you have anything to add to this?
That's an interesting point, because different jurisdictions, they have different legal regimes, and they have to keep up to their standards to make sure that a designation will stand even if it's attacked. I guess for private sector, when they see a name that appears on one list but not on another, you don't have to block if your jurisdiction is not telling you block, but you have to pay attention to and see that as a red flag. If you have a party in a transaction whose name appears on a Ukrainian list, but is not, for example, sanctioned by UK, and you are a UK-based company, you don't have the ground to block that, but that's a clear red flag. You have to stop. And always remember, you can reject transaction or return transaction. So think about that, and always that will be a great chance for you to file SARs and say, hey, we had this transaction whose a party on that transaction whose name appear on Ukrainian list. These are the information we have. Now we file a SAR to the FIU of country, and that information can also help the country to speed up the designation process. So think about the ground for blocking, but also think about SAR, think about returning transactions. So there are other ways. So this is back to your previous question, red flags. If an entity's name appear on a Ukrainian list, which is by far the most populous list, treat that as a red flag for sure. Because, they have the intelligence that is frontline, they know things that others, they don't. And by the time that, they will be designated by US, UK, EU, and EU, how difficult it is to designate someone. All member states have to agree. So please be proactive and take that into consideration as a red flag.
Yes, and absolutely. What I tell classes is examine your own company's or financial institution's risk appetite. A lot of times regimes will use Ukraine's list as a jumping point where, okay, let's do some more research and see if we have enough information to actually issue a designation. Al, do you have anything else to add to that before I move on?
No, not really. I mean, the Ukrainians list that Elena's discussing, the sanctions list, in my experience, I've found that has been a pretty good predictor of companies that will be sanctioned. If the Ukrainians sanctioned them in the past, in many instances, they end up getting sanctioned later down the line. Like these Russian companies aren't being singled out for no reason.
Yep, absolutely. And, just use it. It's a springboard. Consider your risk appetite and take a look. It might not be sanctioned today, but it's a good indicator that it might be sanctioned or restricted on another day. I wanted to pivot a little bit to enforcement. So we've recently seen this mass tranche of sanctions be imposed on companies and individuals who materially support Russia's war against Ukraine. We've seen some significant criminal prosecutions by the Justice Department of individuals who violate trade controls. This question is for Amir. How much is criminal prosecution a deterrent? What would serve a bigger deterrent if there is such an option?
So as you said, there has been this increasing trend for criminal prosecution, and last year, March 2nd, 2023, this year, sorry, it's still 2023, DOJ announced that they hired 25 more prosecutors dedicated to export control and sanction violations. So you're just at the beginning of it. I guess we're going to see more and more. And we know the fines are pretty heavy. It could be up to $1 million criminal and up to 20 years for each violation of IEPA. So pretty high. The question is whether that's enough to deter someone. And it's, I guess, more philosophical question, whether making something crime will prevent that, yes, no. I think we have to acknowledge that sanction evasion is a lucrative business. So we have to change the balance. If it's lucrative, then the risk is just way higher. So don't even risk it. If you want to engage in that activity, it's very likely that you will be caught. And not only you have to give up all the money that you made, you will be fined up to 1 million, and you may end up in jail for 20 years. Again, this is more philosophical question, whether making something a criminal act will prevent that. Yes, no. I think it can slow it down, but probably it will not fully stop it. But I think this is a welcome move that we have DOJ very involved in this. And again, this is I think from now on, we're going to see more and more enforcement, prosecution by DOJ in parallel with OFAC, BIS administrative actions.
Okay, thank you. I want a follow-up question that we have in the queue for Elena. Please specify where you can find this Ukrainian list. I know it's public because I've seen it before. Can you have somebody plop it in the chat if at all possible?
Yeah, I can type it in the chat. I think for you it's Nazika or Gua, but I can do it. There is an extension then after this address, so I will do it.
Great, thank you so much. Let's see. I'm going to go to some questions now. We have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to go to some question. To the eyes of the international financial community, which one, or of all of these countries that we mentioned that are involved in the topic of trade control evasion, could have the biggest risk for banking, biggest reputational risk? This is for any one of you, so feel free to jump in.
I can go first. I think there is no specific country that everyone has to focus. Like the risk of sanction evasion could be anywhere. As Olena mentioned, we had companies in Switzerland, there are companies in the UK, even in the States. We have everywhere companies involved somehow in sanction evasion. So for financial institution, the reputational damage is if you really had an indication and you didn't do anything, that's where the main reputational damage can come from. And that's you had clear information that one of your clients who was working with Russia suddenly stopped all the Russia transaction, and now they have a huge business with a country that shares border with Russia. If you don't act on that, I guess if someone finds that out and it goes to the press, that's huge reputational damage to me. So really try to understand your clients and goes to our point. We all heard it, but KYC, it's now the most important thing because it's almost impossible to catch some of these things at transactional level. So it's important to really know your customer. And I'm going to say something that some people may agree, KYCC, I'm not a big fan of it, but make sure when you look at in your KYC, you look into your client's compliance control. You can do their job, but make sure if you onboard someone who is dealing with, sensitive goods, they better have a sanction and export control program. If don't, probably don't even onboard them. It's too risky and you don't have the resources to do all the job for them and you don't have the information. So instead of focusing on KYCC, add an element into your KYC asking, hey, do you have a sanction compliance program? If no, then really reconsider that client relationship.
Okay. Anyone else want to jump in on that one? All right, sounds like we're going to the next question. This one actually should be pretty easy, but let me just throw that out there because a lot of folks don't know what a dual use product is. Anything can be used by the Russian military, anything from food to shoes. So the question is there a public list for dual use products that can be accessed by firms and financial institutions? Jump on in.
I can take this one. So there's a very complicated answer to this, and there's a very simple answer to this. And I'll try to go somewhere in between. There is a overarching export control framework known as the Wassenaar Arrangement that was developed back in the early 90s, built on Cold War era dual use good control lists. And that resource is available online. That is just the overarching framework. Each country that is a participant in the Wassenaar Arrangement will derive its export control laws from the Wassenaar Arrangement, but it is up to the individual country ultimately to enforce and determine which of those goods are going to be enforced as dual-use goods. So if you are based in the United States, for example, you would want to go check out the Bureau of Industry and Securities Commerce Control List. If you're in Taiwan, which is a whole different context, you're going to want to go to the Ministry of Economic Affairs. They have different export control lists for different countries, for example, Russia. There's an overarching dual-use control list from the Wassenaar Arrangement. It'd probably be best to use that as your framework, and then check also your local jurisdiction's laws.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, good. I hope that answers it. Another question that came up. Is there a specific list of the machine tools that are being spoken about here? I think that's an Al question.
There's a couple of different people actually out there who have been monitoring the various machine tools spotted on Russian defense plant floors. I've done a little bit of that. I don't want to go out and name specific companies just because you see a machine there on a factory floor doesn't mean that they were involved in it, and I don't want to give a list that hasn't undergone a legal review. But I'd recommend, there's someone on Twitter, Kamil Galiev, who's actually done a tremendous job in accumulating evidence of foreign manufactured machine tools at various Russian defense plants involved in missile production. And if you follow my account on Twitter, I'm sorry, this is just self-promotion, but I do tend to retweet from other accounts that are tracking this stuff. I do occasionally, but not super often. I just know, all I can say from my own research is that the machine tool fleet that the Russian defense industry has today was built up over 2 decades. Vast majority of it comes from foreign suppliers. It's a mix of European, Taiwanese, South Korean, Japanese, and increasingly, though, there's limited evidence of this, Chinese machine tools as well. So I'm sorry, I don't want to give a call out specific companies at this point, but if you look around, there are plenty of people out there who are monitoring this and can give you a sense of what those companies are.
Absolutely, and understood. And I'll be hopping on Twitter after this so I can follow you. Anyone else have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted, if you don't mind, to add that there are publications in the media about machine tools in different media. There are publications about companies, Spinner. It's publication in Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. You can find this investigation. There is also publication about DMG Moore. It's also in the media. So yeah, you can read about this. And indeed, Kamil Galiev, he has his project to research machine tools, but there are other projects. Ukrainian think tanks are researching this. And if somebody want more specific information about machine tools, I have, for example, a PowerPoint presentation from our partners in Ukraine. I can share if this is specifically of interest. It's a very critical topic because we understand that not only, we were focusing, for example, on semiconductors, but it is very hard issue to control, and machine tools potentially can be much easier issue which we can control and which can really help us choke the Russian war machine. And this is why now more and more think tankers will be investigating it and putting more and more pressure on those companies and governments to look into this issue.
Yeah, I want to make clear, I thank you, Elena, for pointing out the amazing reports that Ukrainian organizations have put out. And there are actually a number of very good investigations out there. PBS NewsHour put out some reporting twice last year, or actually a bit this year, about American-made machine tools showing up on Russian defense plant floors. And I'm trying to think of some other examples, but if you dig around, just Google machine tools Russia, Ukraine, there are going to be plenty of good resources out there. But yeah, particular attention should be paid to the work that Ukrainian organizations are doing. They've recognized this issue regarding machine tools for a while now, and they've done a lot of very good work to try to bring more public attention to the role of those tools in the Russian war machine.
And go ahead.
Just wanted to flag the common high priority item list. That's the list that G7 countries together are publishing, and these are the goods that require extra attention. It's more basic compared to what other panelists mentioned, but these are what regulators put out there. So make sure you really pay attention to those goods.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. There are a ton of really, really good questions, but I would encourage you guys to please connect with us on LinkedIn, ask those questions, and we'll try and provide as much information as we can. Follow us, follow Al on Twitter. Don't follow me because I'm little crazy. But I wanted to give just a heartfelt thank you to our panelists today, Amir, Elena, Al, for coming in and for doing this and for providing really, really good information. Each one of you, as a reminder, will get this recording, and you will also get a 2-week trial to Dolphin. So please join us. Please help us protect the global financial integrity. This is absolutely crucial that we work as a team to stop illicit financial transactions. Any closing remarks from you guys?
Yeah, please help us protect financial integrity and the global peace and security for the sake of all of us. Thank you.
Absolutely. Anyone else?
And yeah, thanks for joining. It's a difficult task shared between us, and always we are here. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us, and we'll be happy to help.
Absolutely. Al, any last words of wisdom?
Words of wisdom. I mean, what I would say to private sector actors who might feel that this is a task that is, due diligence, KYC, with these sort of complicated trade evasion or export control schemes, if you're feeling overwhelmed and, you don't have to do this all alone. There are, like I said, there are resources out there in the private sector. There are NGOs out there who, if you want to make a good faith effort to go after these networks and point them out, you can go to them. You don't have to conduct due diligence alone. And it's a task that's shared between the government and the private sector, but it can also be shared between private sector and NGOs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will mention this, on the subject of you are not alone. All of you will get that 2-week trial to Dolphin. We have something called pods. They are community fora in specific subjects like AML-CFT, like Russia sanctions, like general sanctions. Come in, talk to us, engage in conversations. It's a place where we can share information, where we can work together. So I urge you to go ahead and go in there and talk to us. Sound good? All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Have a terrific Wednesday, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye. Thank you.